All right, guys, welcome back to First Team Fantasy, and we are going to give a recap of that Thursday night game. It crushed the over. It was a 40-point line, and the Jags ended up winning 31-24, 55 total points. It was pretty great for a lot of fantasy players in this one, not named Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence had a much better game than I thought he would against the Saints defense. He was 20 for 29, 204 yards, a touchdown, but he had 8 rushing attempts for 59 yards, which was surprising because he was in a knee brace, was questionable going into this game with the knee, and ran the hell out of the ball. He was the leading rusher for the Jaguars, but that didn't mean anything to Travis Etienne. He got in the end zone twice, only had 53 yards on 14 attempts, but also caught 3 passes on 5 targets for 24 yards. He gave you 22.7 fantasy points, was obviously the leading scorer on the Jaguars. He had a great day, and Travis Etienne continues to get into the end zone.
Yeah.
As the Jaguars get into the red zone, they turn around and hand him the ball, and he trots right in.
Yeah.
So ETN week after week continues to show why he is a great RB1, and I will never consider benching him. Honestly, whatever matchup it is, if they're going to score, it's going to be with ETN. Christian Kirk owners were happy, though, because he got into the end zone this week. He was 6 for 6 with 90 yards, and that touchdown also had a fumble, so he would have crossed that 20-point line if not for that, but he finished with 19 PPR points, so you still love to see that, and was once again one of the top targets for Trevor Lawrence with Zay Jones out. We're going to have to continue to see what happens once Zay Jones gets back in, if he does ever get back in, because he's out. He's only played like 1.25 of a game so far. So we'll see where that goes. But Calvin Ridley is, like I said before this game, I was worried about his production, and he didn't have much. He didn't get his first target until the second half of this game, which he caught for a 5-yard pass, and proceeded to get 3 more targets that he didn't catch. He had one rushing attempt for no yards. So he only finished with 1.5 PPR points in this one. And, he had some, like a deep pass. He went out of bounds. Couple targets that weren't the greatest. But it's concerning to me because he's getting out-targeted by Jamal Agnew. And if you have Calvin Ridley, that is absolutely something that you do not want to see. Agnew got 6 targets, and Ridley only got 4. Agnew finished 4 for 6, 36 yards, 1 rushing attempt for -1 yard, only 7.5 PPR points. Not someone I'm necessarily interested in, especially, if Zay Jones happens to come back, he's going to be eliminated from relevance. But Ridley is a serious concern at this point because he's out there for 88% of the snaps.
Yeah.
And he ran cardio for a whole half of the game. So I don't know what to do. Evan Ingram, solid once again. 5 catches on 7 targets for 45 yards, 9.5 PPR. I mean, so far he has, from last year, was the most boomer bust tight end, kind of like how Gerald Everett is, something like of that nature. And this year he's just the most steady possible guy. It's a great thing to see if you have Evan Ingram, but yeah, he just proves to be another solid top tight end option. And outside of that, I mean, their kicker, McManus, hit all 4 extra points, made his field goal, 8 points. I mean, I guess he's a good option because the Jags do have a good offense, but that's really all for the Jags. I mean, the main guys, Lawrence, I think, is getting back in shape where you can kind of count on him to start. And then Etienne and Kirk are obvious. Ridley, though, I don't know. I mean, it'd be hard to trade him realistically. I heard someone was like, I might move Ridley for Zay Jones straight across. And I really don't hate that at this point. I mean, we see Zay Jones getting work, or Zay Flowers, I apologize. It's a big difference. But Zay Flowers is getting a lot of work every week, and Ridley is like, hell, it's like touchdown or bust at this point. He's like a glorified Gabe Davis, and I just can't really count on that. So, yeah, it's really all I got for the Jags.
Yeah, no, and I don't even have too much to touch on. And you kind of touched on it there. Was Calvin Ridley when he was being drafted? He was getting drafted third round ahead of Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf, Debo Samuel, and that's just how high they had him. And then Christian Kirk took this crazy plummet in drafts. So I mean, if you got Kirk, you got him for a crazy steal, and if you drafted Ridley, yeah, you're at the point where it's like your trade offers. If someone would give you Zay Flowers, I would say take it. But if
Yeah,
I had Zay Flowers at this point, I wouldn't even give you him for Calvin Ridley. So you're in this weird purgatory where, unless someone's generous and still super high on Ridley, you're probably stuck with him because I wouldn't trade him
yeah.
super low because of where you
Nah, I
drafted him.
wouldn't dip too low for at this point. It's like you're pretty much holding until. I mean, their bye week is in a couple weeks, week 9,
Hmm.
and at that point, you're just hoping for a better second half of the season that he turns it around. Because yeah, you're not selling him off for pennies because he is on a good offense, but you can't really start him at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess that'll take us to the Saints side of the ball. Derek Carr, we saw through the game, he had multiple occasions where he just was not in sync with his receivers. Either he was overthrowing. There was one where it seemed like he was upset with Chris Olave for not continuing the route, but Derek Carr threw it like 5 yards out of bounds. I don't even think it was catchable for Calvin Johnson out there, but he was still upset with
No,
him
yeah,
about it. But
yeah.
I mean, he threw the ball 55 times, completed 33 of them, 301 yards, a touchdown, a pick, 3 rushes, 14 yards, 18.4 fantasy points, his best week of the season so far.
And we did say I did pick Derek Carr as a start this week, and
That's a
without
solid
that
week.
interception, yeah, it's a solid week. And hell, if Foster Moreau would have caught that ball at the
Yeah,
end,
that
he
would have
would have
been
had another
22.
touchdown,
Yeah.
and he would have had 22, and it probably would have went into overtime, so it could have been even more. But
Yeah.
damn,
Yeah.
what
So, I
happened
mean,
happened.
yeah, Derek Carr, fantasy wise, had a solid week. Alvin Kamara, I mean, 17 carries, 62 yards, 12 catches for 91 yards on 14 targets. And believe it or not, that 14 targets, he wasn't even the highest targeted player on the Saints this week, surprisingly, with 14 targets. But I mean, just a monster week again for Kamara.
Yeah,
29.3 fantasy points without a touchdown is unheard of. I mean, that's just incredible. He played 73% of
and
snaps.
Taysom Hill gets in from the one, and he doesn't.
Of course.
Yeah,
Of course.
it's
It's the Saints. We
good
saw,
lord.
yeah, we saw Jamal Williams return. It was his first week back. He played 22% of snaps, had 5 carries for 14 yards, 1.4 fantasy points. I mean, going forward, you'll assume Jamal will get 30, 35, maybe 40% of snaps. I'm not worried if I'm a Kamara owner, especially with his receiving upside. He's going to get all those catches out the backfield. Maybe
If
Jamal Williams snakes a couple touchdowns at the goal line. That's the only thing I'd be concerned about.
I don't think I'm really too concerned about that. Now, just looking at the splits between the last 4 weeks since Alvin Kamara returned, I mean, he played 63% of the snaps in week 5. That's when Kendre Miller played his most. But looking at the most of it, yeah, I think he'll probably top out around like 30% for Jamal Williams
Yeah.
because we have Kendre Miller playing 22% of the snaps last week, and he got 3% this week, and Jamal Williams came in for 22.
Mm-hmm.
I think Alvin will stay around that 70% mark.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the amount of offensive snaps they play, just having Alvin Kamara out there suits their game plan.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I don't think Jamal eat too much into it. He kind of just spells him.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, the only guy with more targets than Kamara in this game was Chris Olave. He actually saw 15 targets. He caught 7 of them for 57 yards, 12.7 fantasy points. I mean, a solid week for Olave. I mean, I guess you could have hoped for more on 15 targets, but also, as if you're an Olave owner, 15 targets. I mean, that's a huge share. So I mean, I'm happy with that for this week. I mean, he didn't get in the end zone, but again, 12.7 points, not great, but it's not going to kill you. Michael Thomas,
Yeah.
kind of. there's a couple things going on here that is kind of funny. He only had 3 catches for 42 yards. He had 7 targets, which is right on par. Was not the greatest game for Michael Thomas, but he caught a touchdown. He gave you 13.2 fantasy points, his best week of the season fantasy-wise. And it was kind of an ugly game for him. But it was his best week.
2 more catches was all I needed.
Yeah. And he could have got him.
Damn it.
And he very well could have got him.
7 targets. This is the second time in a row. Gallup can't get 1 more catch. Thomas can't get 2. All the targets were there. It's like, what the hell is happening? But
yeah. And
so it goes.
I mean, someone that was heavily involved in that offense again was Taysom Hill. He had 5 targets
than Foster Moreau.
Yeah, he had 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 50 yards. He had 5 carries for 18 yards in that touchdown that we brought up, 16.8 fantasy points, and he played 58% of snaps. I mean, it was a very solid week. I mean, I don't think anyone was starting Taysom Hill, but that's the second week we've kind of seen his targets and involvement in that offense kind of be significant. Again, Juwan Johnson is not playing. When he comes back, what will that mean for Taysom Hill? I don't know, but
I don't know if I think it'll mean something for Foster Moreau. I think he's going to get the Foster Moreau snaps. I think we've talked about, they paid Taysom Hill a lot of money, and
you got to play him.
It's just like he's out there at quarterback. He's lining up out wide. He's just doing everything. So he's going to play. I mean, honestly, as a tight end option at this point, if they're going to keep using him like that,
he's a solid play. Yeah, no, he's a solid play.
If you look at the goal line run, it was a wildcat snap for Taysom. They had a lineman lined up in the backfield with him who was lead blocking for him, and it was easy money. I mean, if they're going to be able to do stuff like that, then I really do not hate having Taysom Hill rostered at the very least.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I'm leaving Moreau for last. I'm going to touch on Rashid Shaheed. He saw 8 targets. He caught 4 of them for 28 yards. He rushed once for 4 yards, finished 7.2 fantasy points. He
almost had that touchdown.
Yeah.
He almost had that beautiful one-handed touchdown, but
yeah, no, he did. And it's kind of funny because we were saying, he's a super high risk because he can catch the deep ball. Seeing 8 targets for him is,
yeah, this is the second week in a row his snaps have been over 70%. If he's going to continue, he had over 60 snaps 2 weeks in a row. He's going to continue having this kind of involvement, then, hell.
Yeah. And then Foster Moreau, 3 catches, 33 yards on 4 targets, played 50% of the snaps, 6.3 fantasy points. He's obviously not a viable fantasy option. He could have sent this game to OT or Dennis, or gave him the chance to go for 2 for the win. I want to lay into him, but I feel bad for the guy. I really do. He's gone through a lot. Yeah, he's gone through a lot this offseason. That would have been a huge moment for him. And instead, it was a dropped pass that cost him the game. And you could see, he was upset about it. I'm not going to lay into him like crazy. He's a former Raider. But it was painful. He was wide open back of the end zone.
For betting purposes, for Saints fans, for everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone except for Jaguars fans, that was painful to watch.
Yeah. So, it was a very tough break. Blake Groupie missed a field goal early on, made 3 more, made an extra point, 10 fantasy points. Saints defense, who I actually somewhat liked this week, only gave you 4 fantasy points if you did start him. And that's really it. The Jaguars were able to score the ball a lot more efficiently than I'm sure a lot of us thought, and that's had a lot to do with the Saints offense at times was just sputtering and going 3 and outs. And you give Trevor Lawrence and the guys enough opportunities, they're going to put points up, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny because in the preview episode I said I liked the Derek Carr start and the Jaguars defense start. Well,
The
the
defense
Jags
did
defense
solid.
happened to get a pick six. So even though they gave up 24 points, they still came through. What they get 10 points, I believe.
Yeah, 10 points. So, I mean, solid week.
Getting 10 points out of your defense is nice on any given week.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, I think that's all we got for this one. We will be back with all of the Sunday morning previews. And, any questions you guys have, comments, once again, thank you for all the support. And come back next time, take more reps with the first team.
Yes, sir.